We are, in fact, we are live. We are live with the Graphic Design Contest Awards here at the Armchair Dragoons at the ACDC. So welcome, everybody, to those Graphic Design Awards. And so I'm Brant Guillory. I'm the guy who was crazy enough to actually want to be in charge of all of this. And so joining us for this one, we've got a couple of industry veterans here with us, whose faces you may not recognize because you normally just see names on boxes here and there, but have both been around the industry for quite a while. And so Tim Allen Tim, how long have you been doing wargame graphics at this point? Are you up over 2 decades? You got to be.
I think so. Probably back to about 2007, somewhere around there. 2010.
Okay.
I think.
So it we're closing in on it. Been a while. And so Lamps Are Going Out is one that I know for sure. We've got a couple of Victory Point games out there. What are some of the other bigger ones that you've knocked out along the way?
I've done a lot of smaller ones for
you had one recently for High Flying Dice.
High Flying Dice is the latest one I did. Hot Sand, Cold Steel. It was a fun little one to do.
Yeah.
And I say little in terms of that there were vast numbers of counters and it wasn't a large map. There was still enough there to have a good game.
Yeah. Cool. And so Amabel running Hollandspiele. Howdy.
Hi. Yeah, my wife Mary and I run Hollandspiele. We've been doing that for 5-6 years now. And
has it only been 5 years or 6 years?
Yeah, it started in 2016, so it's going to be 5 years.
Yeah. Wow.
And before that, I've been designing games. My first game was published in 2012, so I've been 8-9 years.
Yeah. Been doing a bunch. It's just Hollandspiele is there's so many games that we've talked about over the years for Hollandspiele that 5 years just doesn't seem nearly long enough for it to have been all of them. Hey, look, that's totally cool. Love it to death. So for folks that are watching us on YouTube, feel free to throw questions, comments in there. As we have questions for the panel and questions about the designs that we've got, we'll show those off and we'll throw those questions at the crew here. One of the things we wanted to talk about a little bit up front here as a part of the contest piece is we wanted to take a little bit of time and discuss with Tim and Amabel some of the process of graphic design in the wargaming world. And we're not talking the nuts and bolts of how to move the mouse around and how to make stuff happen in a specific application. But when you're going through the process of assigning graphics to a designer, when you're going through the process of looking at what you've been given from a designer, what are the kinds of things you do? What are the kinds of things you want to work on? And some of the back and forth even between these two roles that these two folks represent. And so, Amabel, starting with you, because that's really Tim's not just saying, oh, I'm going to randomly make graphics for a game here. Tim's working off of an assignment that a publisher gives him. And so when you've got graphics coming in from a designer, I'm betting it's rare that those graphics are camera ready when they arrive to you. And so at some point, you've got to go find a graphic designer to do something. What are the kinds of instructions and kinds of guidance that you provide to someone like Tim? And what are the sorts of things that you expect them to take out of that guidance?
Well, it's going to vary depending on the project, of course. We try to match the project to the skills of that artist or graphic designer. So there are certain artists we'll look at for certain periods or whatnot. We sometimes have very strong ideas about how we want it to look. When we did the game The Vote, for example, there's a spiral score track that's very similar to a late Victorian era board game. And we wanted that look. So that was a specific instruction we gave to that artist. Other times it's more just, you're the artist. We'll let you kind of express it how you want to express it within certain parameters as far as functionality. Because a very important thing about any board game, you're playing the game, is it has to be functional. You can have the prettiest counters in the world, but if they don't look so pretty when they're shrunk down to counter size, it's not useful. Sometimes we get more technical stuff like how big the hexes should be, because you don't want a game where the counters are larger than the hexes they're supposed to sit in. That's not a good form factor. Sometimes we'll have a note about color palette. Usually we leave that more up to the artist. And as to how much back and forth there is, it really depends on what we feel about what we've been given. I don't have any real formal training or education with art. I just kind of know what I like. Mary has a lot more formal training in that, and she also knows what she likes. Sometimes we like the same thing, and sometimes we don't, and that's fun. But we figure it out, and we talk to the artist, and just try to communicate and get somewhere where we're all kind of happy. When it's another designer's game, not my design, we do involve a designer. Say, hey, what do you think about this? What are your thoughts on this? And sometimes there'll be a difference of opinion between us and the designer as far as how the art works. We want to make sure they're as happy as possible, because I've only had games published where I wasn't happy with the art when I wasn't the publisher of the game. And I don't want to put someone else in that situation. At the same time, we do have kind of strong opinions as to what we like, so we try to figure that out. So a lot of us play it by ear, and it depends on the actual artist who we're working with.
I imagine part of that also depends on whether it's a series game or a one-off, because Horse and Musket has an established visual style, for instance. Commander has an established visual style.
And for those, we will tend to use the same artist over and over again. For example, with the District Commander series you just mentioned, Jose Farah does the map art on that. And we gave him all 4 projects at once.
Oh, wow. Okay.
We committed to publishing these, so we knew we would need these 4 maps. And then I handled the counters because it's cheaper if I handle the counters. You don't need to pay me. So, so with series, we tend to try to stick with particular artists for that series. For one-off stuff, it varies. Yeah.
I think for someone who's got the ability to handle their own graphics, it certainly is cheaper to be your own graphics guy, because I was my own graphics guy. The challenge I had was that I tried to be my own developer, and that's a bad idea. I don't recommend that for anybody. That's way beyond the scope of this show, but don't do that, people. That's not good. So Tim, when you get something, in the mail, right, digitally, obviously these days, when you get an assignment show up from someone like Amabel that says, here's the game, here's kind of what we're looking at, here's some of the visual style. Are you trying to nail it on the first draft, or are you expecting some back and forth? Are you expecting, hey, here's a cut at it, tell me what you want me to change? How does that process work on your end once you receive this batch of stuff to do?
Once I've got something in the mail and we've established what the absolute size is supposed to be, that's usually my very first thing. In terms of technicalities, I need to know, what's the absolute size of the map? What are we working with? How many? What's the number of hexes? What is the size that you expect the counters to be? And once I've got that information, then I can sort of start to try and piece something together. I usually do like to send a few initial drafts, sometimes a lot of initial drafts. Maps can often go through 10, 20, 30 different incarnations.
Wow.
And it's always nice to be able to bounce that off someone. I don't really want to just go it alone. The best way to do that is to have input from both the designer and the publisher at the same time. And often I have been lucky enough to have that. So that's always nice.
Yeah.
Then I can
definitely.
We can jump back and forth to say, well, do we really need hex numbers, which I hate. I don't like it.
Me too.
So if we can get rid of something like that, let's get rid of it, because that's just superfluous information. It needless clutter. but sometimes you need to keep them in there, and that's fine. But that's something that I need to know, and we can talk about that. And that's usually one of those important things that comes up. Sometimes I come up with ideas that have to be shot down by the developer or the designer. Often I haven't talked to developers as much as designers, but sometimes you do end up doing that. Herman Lippmann, for instance, who was the developer for a number of games and designer of his own as well, although he was usually not his own developer. That's not a good idea. So that's what we ended up doing with that World War I game. What was it? The one that you mentioned, the lamps are going out. Yeah, so we had both the designer and Herman as the developer and the publisher all talking to us all at the same time. It was great. That's all that input, all that information going back and forth. That's the kind of thing that only makes a game design and game graphics better. So really, that's the ideal.
Yeah. No, that's good. The when you're working on the map, how much of it is okay? I've got this paper map that somebody was using for playtesting, whether it's got a bunch of highlighter on it or hand scribbled pencil scrawl or whatever. How much of it are you working just from that playtest map versus going back to a map of the actual terrain and sort of throwing a hex grid over it and seeing what you can do with the original terrain, if at all?
Right. It depends entirely on the design that comes in. Sometimes there's so much detail already on the prototype map, the playtest map, that I don't really need to do much of anything. But having said that, I almost always, immediately when I get something like that in the mail, I'm going to start Googling. I'll do a quick Wikipedia search to see what that campaign, what that battle was actually all about, and then I'll do a lot of map searches and graphic searches to see what other people have done in terms of other maps for the war games, or just whatever other maps are out there on the battle. And also I would be looking at just basically images or photographs or paintings or whatever, anything that might relate to that. All that stuff I throw into a file to help me sort of gel and get some ideas on what the overall theme should really be. What should it look like? What should I feel when I'm looking at this map?
Yeah, no, totally understand. The one last question on sort of your approach with all of this. As you are developing things and you have questions and whether questions about what you're actually working on or just sort of aesthetic questions, hey guys, is this close? Is this good? Is this bad? How much of that is going between you and the publisher versus you and the designer versus sort of everybody in one big group hug email together? I know the dreaded answer is sort of it depends, but in your experience, what have you seen?
In my experience, it's more the publisher that I would be talking to than the designer. The designers are the ones who are sending me the maps done on a napkin kind of thing. It seems like sometimes they don't even know exactly what they want or how it should look. So the publishers usually have a better idea on what will sell and what won't, what looks good and what doesn't. Like Amabel, I'm not I have no formal training in it, so often I will defer to other people who have actually gone through the process of graphic artist type training, because this is everything I've learned has just basically been on the fly, and often
you'd be amazed at how common that is. So at various points in my life, I have taught graphic design at the college level. I have never once taken a graphic design course at the college level. And yet I have taught many. Just, again, 25, 30 years of pushing pixels around, you can't help but learn a few things.
Right.
Amabel, some kind of reactions to some of the stuff that Tim's been saying there in terms of the kinds of things he's looking for coming from the publisher, the kinds of things that you're sort of looking at as it comes back in from a designer like that? To my knowledge, the two of y'all have never worked together, so it's not like we're asking y'all to spill secrets. That
there was once.
Once, yes, that's right.
Yeah, now, you actually had done the map for another publisher previously, and then for Ukrainian Crisis.
That was the one, yeah.
Yeah, and but you finessed it for us for what we needed from it once we took over the project.
Because it was 90% done for Victory Point games.
Mm-hmm.
Under another title, they had some. Can't remember what it was called at that time.
Yeah, they had a title, that's for sure.
Something putting something about there was some pun type.
It was a pun. It was a pun title.
Yeah, we're probably best off leaving it in the dustbin. So
and so we worked together the one time, and when Mary was working for another company,
yes,
there were a couple of games where she was project managing there.
Okay.
And that makes a lot of sense, and that's the kind of communication that you want, and it does vary from project to project. I have a question actually. Now that just listening to you talk about it. Do you prefer like hex grid maps or area maps? Like, do you have a personal preference?
I have a personal preference. I prefer area maps, and that's because it allows me to be more creative. Not all the time, but there's usually more areas around the edges and things that you can just kind of have fun with, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that basically is the answer there.
Hexes are just equidistantly sized areas.
Okay.
So, Amabel, a question sort of particular for you, riffing off of something Tim had mentioned earlier, like one of the first things he wants to ask is sort of what are the dimensions he's working with? Mm-hmm. Obviously, you've got some particular production constraints because you use one printer for pretty much damn near everything you do. How much of the finished form factor that you're creating are kind of limitations imposed by the printing press that you use, to where you may even have to go back to the designer and sort of reel them in with, hey guys, we can't print that, we can print this, or if we print this, it's going to cause the game to cost so much that it's not economically viable, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. So generally there are two sizes that we use particularly. One is 17 by 22. The other one is 22 by 34 inches. I don't know what it is for metric, but and generally most of our games tend to be 17 by 22. If it reaches something that's larger, we go up a size. We can't really go larger than that. I mean, we could, but I couldn't play test it. Is the thing, because I can fit a 22 by 34 on my table if I clear everything off of it.
Yeah,
and that's why our games have that map size. That's why they have that. They only take a couple hours to play because I can't leave it out with a cat. I don't have room for it if it's more than 22 by 34. And I generally have a pretty good idea from having done enough of these games, like even with a hex grid map, like how many hexes there should be on the grid. Yeah. I don't like have the exact number in my head, but I can look at it and say, you know what, this looks like it's going to be very tight. We might need to go down to 9/16 counters instead of 5/8 inch counters.
Yeah.
And those are considerations we have when we get the game from the designer. We generally don't sign something until it is like finished. We still go and develop it. We still work on it. Still might change, but we generally have a finished design with a finished map. And generally, if it's not within our parameters, we generally don't do it. Rather than try to, push the designer to shave off some hexes or whatnot. There was a game I had done for another publisher that the map was resized to a smaller size. I needed to cut off like a quarter of the map, and it did damage to the design. Like it still worked, but it didn't work as well, and it didn't have enough room to breathe.
Yeah,
I think one thing we tend to see with people who are trying to do very small games is there are not enough hexes on a hex grid map, or it's too tight and there's not enough room to like move around the flanks and whatnot. So it really varies there, but those tend to be our are two sizes, and we tend to want to size it so that the counters have some room within the hex, or the space. We tend to want to use bigger hexes if we can. There have been some games that we could have put on a 22 by 34. I'm sorry, 17 by 22 with the number of hexes that were on there, but because the stacking would involve, maybe 8, 9 counters in a hex, and our counters are pretty thick.
Yeah.
We need much larger hexes to accommodate that, just as a form factor, because you don't want to be playing a game where you're knocking stuff over. You don't want to not making a hex and then you bother, rummaging through the counters.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I just, there's always sort of the designer's dream of this is exactly how I want it, but the production realities step in at some point and say, no, this is what you get, and you will be happy with it.
and
that's what you can actually print.
Yeah, and the thing is, when you've gotten some experience doing it, like I started doing magazine games. And with magazine games, there are certain restrictions, and you learn those very quickly. You learn, for a 5/8 sheet of counters, it's in a grid of 16 counters in a block, and then a block of 8 at the bottom. And, on a lot of templates. And so you design knowing, well, I don't want 15 red counters and 1 blue counter in a block. I want them all to be the same color. You just design with that naturally in mind. And it tends to speed up that process.
Yeah. An interesting question pop in, and we'll throw this one up there, and then we'll start talking a little bit about the contest itself. How big is too big, and how small is too? I'll tell you, anybody doing half-inch counters these days just hates wargamers because we're all too damn old to be dealing with half-inch counters anymore. And I say that as the resident young guy in most of the war game rooms I'm in. I'm pushing 50, and I'm still the young guy in a lot of these rooms. So I'm glad Amabel's here that I don't have to be the young guy on the call anymore. I've got somebody younger than me here. Doesn't happen that often anymore. But yeah, I think anybody doing half-inch counters just hates war gamers. Amabel, what have you seen? How big is too big? How small is too small?
For counters, I mean, I've seen inch counters, and they're fine if there aren't too many counters.
Okay.
If it's a game with a high counter density, it sprawls too much for me. Most of the counters that we've used, for example, they tend to be 5/8 inch. That's our standard. We'll go to 9/16, either because of hex size or because of the limitations of it, because a standard sheet of 5/8 inch counters is 176 counters. That's 88 counters to half a sheet. And we can do a half sheet or we can do a full sheet. We can't do, if we need 90 counters, we can't do 88 counters plus 2. We'll need to go to a smaller size, a 9/16 inch, which gives us 96 counters on a sheet. We use 3/4 inch counters. Those tend to be nice. Those tend to be more for crossover kind of games. So less of the groggy stuff and more the stuff where we want to get some more Euro-y type people into it. We use it for some of our solitaire games. They tend to be a first war game for people.
Yeah. I think Blitzkrieg had some bigger counters in there.
Yeah, I think those were 3/4 inch. Yeah. And you're playing a game with kids. You don't want little fiddly things. You want something that's a little bit more substantial.
Yeah. The original Warfighter series that I had self-published, going on 14 years ago now, the Bayonet Games Warfighter series that predates DVG's card game by a good 7-8 years.
I was waiting for you to say that.
Amabel's heard this rant before. I made the mistake of designing those at 7/8 inches, and then nobody on the planet had a 7/8 inch die. So I was true to the vision of my design. I went and shelled out to get the 7/8 inch die made, and that is the reason I lost money on that game. Is I had to go get a custom die made for it. Were it not for that custom die, then I probably would have at least broke even on that game. But I didn't know any better, right? I didn't know any better, and so I was trying to do things the way I wanted them done, and I really wish I'd had somebody smarter than me looking over my shoulder telling me not to do that. Oh,
and so today with like the laser, because we use a laser cutting printer, and we do some custom stuff. Like when we did Escape from Hades, the Fred Manzo game, there's a spaceship counter.
Oh, wow.
Like spaceship, giant clunky counter. And we could do that without getting a custom die because it's done with a laser instead.
Okay.
So that's really helped with doing a lot of customizable stuff. And that can be fun. That can add to like the fun factor and the appeal of the game. But, generally we just tend to stick to standard stuff because there's less technical problems to solve, less, we don't need to work about getting this special template done.
Have you done a custom built sub for any of your games in a game that does not include a map? I'm just curious. Have we seen a custom built submarine with no map? Because I hear those are award-winning games these days.
I've heard. We've never done a game with a submarine. I can't think of a single one. So sorry. Maybe we do a submarine.
Mid 2022, we're going to have dinosaurs on submarines coming from Hollandspiele.
Wow. Don't tell Mary. Glad Mary can't hear this.
Don't get her started now.
All right.
Dinosaurs, Mary.
Okay, so
submarine, yeah.
There we go. So to take a moment and sort of angle back into the point of this whole broadcast, the graphic design contest that we wanted to put together for this ACDC, it started out. So for folks that are interested in wargame artwork, there are a couple of different folders over at Consim World. There's an area over at our forums, although it's not as heavily trafficked because we don't have as many designers hanging out with us. There's also a very large, it's over 1,000 people. It's got to be over 1,000 people now, the Wargame Artwork group on Facebook, where there's a lot of really talented folks that are sort of showing off some of what they can do. And a lot of these people are not published professionals. This is Tim shows off a bunch of stuff, especially some of his 3D modeling, just because it looks really cool and he's looking for feedback. But we've got a lot of folks that are just kind of woodshedding, just sort of goofing off, noodling around. Some of them working in PowerPoint, and I have no idea how they create some of the stuff they do, given that they're using something like PowerPoint or Microsoft Paint or something ridiculously rudimentary, and they still create some really nice artwork. And so we wanted to put a contest together to give folks an opportunity to sort of show off a little bit. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of those folks that were sort of those personal creation kind of people, the non-professionals, sort of felt maybe this isn't for me. Despite a lot of encouragement, they still kind of stayed away. But that was the idea, was to give people who aren't industry pros, industry veterans, a chance to just see what you could do and to show off and goof off a little and show us what you could do. What we did was, the game we picked is actually one that came out of Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, called Land Power GAT, G-A-A-T. It is based around one of the scenarios that the U.S. military uses for training staff officers at the Command and General Staff College. Anybody that's interested in how this training works or how these scenarios work, we've got a couple of podcasts on our site. I can put them in the comments later to link to folks where they can see or not see. You can hear some of the discussion around where these scenarios come from and why they use them. But one of the officers out at Fort Leavenworth actually created a very rudimentary war game out of this GAT scenario. And the GAT scenario is in Central Asia. The GAAT is Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey. That's the area, the geographic area in which this takes place. What the U.S. military does is they grab an existing piece of map, they draw entirely new boundaries and borders on it, make up a bunch of new political situations, and they use real terrain to do this with, because you can order those real terrain maps. And so this war game was not created for a commercial publisher. This is not an excuse to try and get some free art out of somebody to go to press with or anything. It's not what we're doing. These are public domain games that were freely released. Land Power GAT was completely uploaded on Board Game Geek. You could pull it for free from there, or you could go to the Combined Arms Research Library at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and download it from there if you want. That's fine. It's 5 years old, 4 years old-ish. It's been around for a little bit, but it's public domain, basically, because it's government work. And so that was the one we wanted to use. We weren't going to be infringing on anybody's personal design. We weren't going to be trying to steal the thunder of an existing publication. But it was something that had a little complexity to it. And that's what we asked for. We asked for, give us a sheet of counters, give us some examples of the cards. You don't have to make them all. Redo the map. Let's see what you come up with, and get it all submitted to us by, this past Thursday, I think was the deadline that we had set. Unfortunately, because of some other issues with getting convention announcements out, there wasn't as much lead time as we really would have liked for some of the designers to work on things, and people that had real deadlines or real world things going on weren't able to take advantage of this. And so if we do this again in the future, and I suspect we'll do something like this again in the future, we needed to we need to give people a little more lead time to get ready for it. With that said, I'm going to pull up some windows here. We're going to take a look at the original artwork from which everybody was working, and we'll get a little bit of feedback from Tim and Amabel on this. Although keep in mind, this is not the stuff that was submitted to us. This is what we're starting from. So let me flip some windows around here, and here we go. We're going to share that window. We want these. All right, so this was our original map, and I can zoom in on this, and we can take a look. You can see this is very rudimentary. This is the same graphic repeated over and over for the woods, some very basic road lines, couple of hex identifiers here and there, but not a lot of fanciness to this. Tim, this is probably a step up from some of your pen and ink sketches on napkins.
This is actually nice and usable. It's clear. You can at least tell exactly what everything is and is not supposed to be, where it is, where the hexes are. It's easy to tell where things are supposed to be and not.
Yeah. So I will also tell you that I've actually created some maps myself in the area of Salyan over here. I just realized it was on this map. I am totally unprepared to pull them up on screen. I'm not going to inflict that on anybody. But I am a little familiar with this area a little bit from having done some hex maps myself in that area. The scale was much smaller. Salyan took up like 8 hexes in the middle of the map. But I know a little bit about where some of this area is. I'm pointing off screen because it's on my side monitor instead of pointing right in front of me because it's on, it's the shared screen for everybody else that's watching here. With that said, Amabel, how does this compare with some of what you receive from designers when they're sending you stuff?
I mean, this looks a lot like the maps that I make and send to an artist to say, hey, please put better. We do get some maps that are similar to this. We do get some that are hand-drawn, like drawn on a hex grid, which there's always a certain charm to that, to see that. And we keep those. I still have Richard Berg, when we published his game Dynasty, he had a map that he had done with colored markers, and we still have that.
He hasn't changed. That's how he makes everything.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's readable, it's clear. It functions. It's not particularly pretty, but it's not meant to be. So,
Yeah, I think at this stage, we're not going for attractive. We're just
exactly.
You want
to make sure the game works.
Yeah, functionality, right?
All right. So this was the map that was originally created for this. And this is the area, again, Georgia starts somewhere over in the upper left. As you work your way down to the lower right, you end up in Azerbaijan. Iran is somewhere down here below in the map. But that's the area of the world we're talking about here. Let's take a look. So this is the first of several counter sheets. There you go, the way the counter sheets are laid out. And the way these are laid out, again, I honestly think these were done with PowerPoint. Which is fine. Like if that's the tool you know how to use and you're initially mocking something up, go with it. The way these are set up is this is front side in the dark column and the back side in the light column. And so that's how these counters are laid out. And there's actually an instruction. There's an instruction slide that tells you how to cut them out and stick them together. But that's what you're looking at. So audience, as you're looking at this, that's the front and the back of the counter right next to each other. So again, as you're first looking over these things, Amabel, this probably looks a lot like the normal sorts of things that come into you from designers, right?
Yeah. Now I'll say the use of the two colors is something I don't see very often, and it's a nice way to differentiate it. Because I know when I lay out counters and I need to have a reverse side, I use a stripe, right? And I'm trying to figure out where should I put this stripe? Is it going to go along the center of the icon? Is it going to go on the bottom of the counter? And that's actually a nice way to approach it with the two colors, as long as you have another way to differentiate them for color blindness purposes.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I mean, they're fine. They're functional. They're like many counters I've seen.
Yeah. Not going to win any awards, but hey, they probably suit the need for playtesting and development without necessarily going overboard, huh?
Yeah.
Well, alrighty. And then where'd my screen go here? So there's our red force counters. Again, there's some different iconography on here that we wouldn't normally see, and you'd have to go through the rules to see some of those things. So the air defense symbol is a part of the combat factors, a little off the wall. The diamond that overlaps the edge of the counter, that's a nice trick. Probably not one that lends well to die cutting, but this is a non-graphic designer putting this together, and these are reasonably functional as we're looking at them. All right, so there we go. There's our map, and there we go. There. So, and then we've got some of the cards. Okay, so there's the instructions on how to put these things together. And here are the cards. So this game does include a handful of different cards. We don't have the entire deck of cards here that we're going to be showing off. This is just the instructions on what the things on the cards do relative to the rules. And then we've got examples of, here's some red cards, here's some blue cards, and then there's a handful of green that are sort of umpire-driven cards that they kind of throw out and affect everybody all at once. Now, we didn't ask the participants to do anything with the green ones, just the red and blue. What they were asked to do is come up with a common back to all of the cards and to take at least 4 different cards and create 4 different cards for us. So for both blue and red. So at a minimum, we should have seen a blue back, a red back, and 4 cards for each of those, plus the counters. And we did tell the designers they can lay them out as a normal counter sheet. You don't have to copy this style because this is a little awkward compared to what many graphic designers are used to working with. But one of the things that's nice about this style is that for people that aren't used to lining up front and back, this lets you line up front and back for your one-off that you're creating reasonably well. You're not having to remember to sort of flip them and then reorder them across the back. And then we asked them to redo the map, give us a new map. So those were the parameters we threw at them. Amabel, is this roughly what a package would be like that you would send to Tim, that you would say, here you go, get to work?
Again, we usually just order the map from an artist, and I handle like cards, counter stuff myself. But if I was to have someone else do cards, counters, I'd give them the counter sheet, give them the card sheet, say, this is what we are working with.
All right. Tim, is this close to what you've normally received from folks? Is this better? Is this worse?
In some respects, it's better. In some respects, worse. It's a bit clearer than a lot of the ones I've gotten, since this has obviously been done. At least it's started out obviously digital as opposed to something analog. So I mean that's very nice. That's a huge difference. Something like this. Often I don't necessarily need to know how to play. So a simpler game than this, with the map and the counters, and even if there's a few cards, I might not need to know what everything means to actually create the graphics. This particular one, I was pretty thrown off by all of the different iconography on those counters. So I probably need to, in addition, I probably need to have a handle on the rules, plus have a designer on hand to walk me through what all this stuff means, how it works, so I have an idea on how I can recreate it on the counters in some effective, or possibly more effective manner.
Yep. Okay. All that makes sense. All right. So we're going to make this screen go away. Let's go away. Haha. And we're going to take a look at one of the first sets of counters here. So let me switch my screen over and go find us our first set. I say counters. We're going to look at the whole package here. So this is a map and the counters and everything else all at once. I got to zoom us in here. Slightly back out. There we go. Just trying to frame it up so when I throw it on the screen here, you guys aren't watching me scrolling. Instead, you're just going to watch me scroll in circles off on a side screen, just randomly. All right, so here is the first of the two entries that we've got. And so we've got a map here that went and added the shaping results table, the combat results table, and then off on the side also added the map key, which was a separate file as it had originally been created. So this person went through them all in there, which is kind of cool, did throw in the original national boundaries for Armenia, Azerbaijan, Iran. They did not, it didn't include the separate sort of made up countries that are in there, but I'm not sure the rules specified those things, that if they went looking through the more detailed files. So first impression, grabbing this map. Tim, what do you like? What do you hate? What do you think is really cool? What do you think needs a little more work?
I like the fact that we're not seeing anything that's too bold. It's got a nice subtle look to it. The colors all complement each other fairly well. I like that. That means that your counters are probably going to be able to pop up the map easily. So you're going to be able to see them quickly at a glance, see everything that's on that map. They're not going to blend in. I've made that mistake myself. Make beautiful counters, make a beautiful map. But then when you put them together, you can't see the counters because you've overdone the counters too much. They look like the map, and then you can't find them. So having done that once, I'm very cognizant of it in the future.
All right.
I'm sorry about the. I'll put the pump.
Amabel, what do you want to add to that?
I mean, I'm in agreement with Tim on all those counts, and it's a good point about the counters needing to pop off the map. I remember there was a project where I did the counters, and we had Anya Ziakowska do the map. She had these really subdued colors. I gave her my counters to begin with, which were kind of bright, really subdued colors. And then I said, "Oh, I better match the map." And I subdued my colors on my counters. She's like, "What did you do? Why did you do this?" And so it was a lesson I had to learn one time. And yeah, it's something that I think people who are new to graphic design for board games necessarily don't see all the time. So having someone do that here in this setting, it's nice to see that, and it's nice that they went the extra mile with the borders. Sometimes that kind of added stuff is good. Sometimes if it's something that's can detract from the game, it's not. Depends on the rule set really, but it's that kind of initiative is nice, and shows they're putting a little bit more research into it, which that's nice. I remember a project I had It was the game that we did on the Battle of Inkerman, and I was using a Russian map as my source, and there was this road that was never used, and the map artist went and researched it, could read Russian, and said, "Well, the road wasn't used because this isn't a road; this is a drainage ditch."
Ah,
So they going that extra mile is something that I really appreciate. Having charts on the map is something that I appreciate, because then I don't need to put them on player aid. as long as players can see them, at any rate.
Yeah.
It depends where players are sitting on the map.
Yeah, that's a good point. If you've got players sitting top and bottom of this map, only the player at the bottom is going to have a good view of those charts. If you've got players sitting left and right of the map, then it's a little easier for them to see.
Exactly.
It's always a tough call, though, because often people will be playing solo, so then you want it sort of in one direction. So there isn't really one great answer for that, I'd say.
No.
Yeah.
But you can go both. You can do it either way. Yeah.
Yep. I think orientation on a map is always a tricky thing. People want to put a little bit of a shadowed 3D effect on the map. The problem is, if you're sitting on the other side of the map, now your hill looks like a hole in the ground.
Oh, yes.
And so you're always sort of torn between how do you give it some visual pizzazz without making it unusable. And look, one of the ways you can identify a first-time map designer, graphic designer, is to count how many distinct Photoshop filters you can identify in the single map. And what's cool is this one, there's like 2, and they're both well used, and this one's not doesn't suffer from filteritis like some others have. Just zooming in, I think this is the classic Letraset, Woods hex.
Nothing wrong with it. Works fine.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows what that is, right? All wargamers know what that is.
And that river, if you can go back to that river for a moment.
Yeah.
Now, that's something that I like, because, the river shouldn't follow the hex grid exactly. Even if it's conforming to the hex grid, it shouldn't be like super angular. So having that flow there just makes it feel more natural, makes it look more like a river.
Right.
And that's a nice touch, and something
but
that
there's going to be some rules lawyer that's going to want to know if he can use this part of the hex on this side of the river right below the R. That guy is out there, and you know that.
I just ignore that guy. So it doesn't.
Well, so again, I'm just scrolling around to give us a look at some of the detail in the map. Something that I do like is I like that the entire town hex is offset with a different color, but that the town iconography doesn't necessarily fill the entire hex. I thought that was kind of nice.
Yeah, as long as there's a reason for it, though, right? I mean,
yes.
If it's necessary, if it's something that, if the entire hex is indeed, according to the rules, has something different to do with the rest of the 6 hexes around it, sure, yeah, that makes absolute sense.
Yeah.
Now, I would say, looking at this now with the river and with the woods there, I don't know if the woods need to be that. It'd be nice to have a bit more rounding within those hexes, so it's not just filling the whole hex.
Exactly, because that pretty much was what the original map looked like, right?
Yeah.
So
They'll give it a more organic look.
Exactly. Yeah.
More immersive.
I was actually about to ask that. Is you noted that the river didn't necessarily perfectly hug the hex side, and yet here we have a forester with a 60-degree protractor out there cutting the edge of the forest to these exact hex angles. And
I think that works fine for the cities, because that's more of a man-made thing.
Yeah.
So I think that for me makes more sense. And you look like at those. You can't see me pointing, but those.
I knew where you were going for.
Yeah, like that effect is nice, and that's something that I would like to have seen maybe on the woods. But that's a nitpick. It's a very fine functional map.
Yeah.
No, I agree 100% with that. Yeah.
And then we have over here I'm trying to zoom and pan a little. Again, those little lakes didn't perfectly hug the hex sides. In every case, they've overlapped the hex sides. It doesn't look like at any point did they pull inside the hex, which is fine. Stylistic choice. But again, you've got these angular edges on the swamps and the woods that you don't have on the larger bodies of water. So, but overall, I think if you were a customer and this is the map that you got, you're not going to be unhappy with it. It's probably not going to, you're not going to frame it and hang it on a wall like a Rick Barber map, but this is a playable map.
Yeah, and I was just going to, one other thing I was going to point out, I appreciated the fact that the dotted lines, which are the national borders, is that right? They're faded somewhat, right? So they're not, especially when they're going along the river edge, you can still see the river. Yeah. Whereas if they had been a darker, it would, well, actually with the dots too, that was also a good choice. They're not overpowering the river so you can't see what's underneath them, so to speak, right? That was a good choice.
Yeah. Well, I don't think you need to hide. I think that's a perfectly, acceptable thought in all of this here. So,
I've made and had published much worse maps.
Oh, that's fine.
Way back.
So, I have a kind of, I don't want to say a philosophical question for you, Tim, but how do you feel about like unplayable hexes? Like, I'm assuming the body of water on the right side of the map there, those hexes, I'm assuming, Brant, aren't playable.
Unplayable, right?
These partial ones here.
No, I mean all the whole.
We all see.
So, how when you're doing it, if you were given a map like this, would you keep the hex grid on those hexes?
I would consider it, but it could go both. It could go either way. Like you could take them off, and I would probably, if I had the time, would like to get rid of them. I mean, if they're not there for a reason, get rid of them. I mean, I don't know. Again, I don't know this game. I don't know the rules. But if there's no reason to have the hexes there, if the whole area is simply unplayable, there's not necessarily much of a reason to have the hexes there.
And in fact, taking the hexes out may reinforce that unplayableness.
Oh yeah, that was my thought. It helped the visual appeal as well. It doesn't detract from it necessarily. I'm not trying to pick at it.
Yeah.
It's
a stylistic choice. I mean, if you did that, you could create the whole right edge to be blue. You could add in more spaces for tracks or tables or whatever you want, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why not?
All right, fair enough. Okay, so continuing this entry, here are the counters that came in with this entry and kept the same layout where you had front and back adjacent to each other in this layout. Now that's not what you would normally get in submitting something for publication, but you know what? For what we're doing, for show us your skills, I think this works okay. So not a huge change in terms of iconography. The layout is a little bit different in the way the unit identifiers were relocated around the counters, but not a whole lot of change in terms of the iconography. Amabel, first impressions, first thoughts here.
I mean, they're clean, functional counters. I can, see the unit symbols really clearly. Yeah, I mean, it does the job.
Yeah. Something that I would want to go look in the rules and see whether or not it was a stylistic decision or whether there's an actual rules difference. You have a mech infantry symbol completely absorbed by the tank tread here, whereas on this one over here, you've got the lines fully extending to the edge of the box. So
I wondered that myself.
I'm sort of curious why those differences might be happening there. And we can speculate, but it's just something that I noticed here with these couple of U.S. counters versus the British counters over here. And I know these are U.S. counters because I recognize the unit designations. That's 5-7 Cav from 1st Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division. Like, I know where these guys are. They're down at Fort Stewart. So it was just something that I noticed, and I was curious if people were going to play around with that at all. One of the other things that is a little weird with this counter set, and again, it's nothing that you can't appropriately address in the rules with your counter manifest, with your instructions. These very busy looking symbols and these AH specific symbols over here, those are the U.S. military standard symbols as specified by Mil Standard 2525 Delta, which is the official U.S. military maps and symbols manual. And so given that this was a game that was produced by a serving officer for the purpose of training other serving officers, the fact that they're using military standard symbology instead of, let's face it, wargaming shorthand sort of makes sense. But it is different than what I think some of us are used to seeing. Wouldn't you think, Tim?
Exactly right. And in which case, like the question you have to ask yourself then is who are you making these counters for? Who's your target audience? So like you said, if the target audience is the U.S. military, perfectly fine with what we're seeing here, because they're going to understand, supposedly they're going to understand what this is. I don't understand most of this stuff, being just an amateur wargamer, right? So if I am the audience, then I would like to see something that's less cluttered looking, something that maybe I can understand better at a glance.
Yeah.
But then that's not to say that that's something that's necessarily something the graphic designer would be expected to do. That's something that the publisher would probably tell them to do, or the designer would say, no, this is how I want it. I want these to be like this. So it's a bit, you might have that leeway to make these more approachable to the amateur or not.
Yeah. Amabel, thoughts?
Yeah, I don't really have any additional thoughts. I'm looking at them because part of it I'm looking at it, as I would look at it like as a publisher, and part of it I'm looking at it as I would look at it as the person who usually does the counters for our games. And for example, I would probably if I was doing this for our publication, I mean, I probably would have maybe a different font. The font's fine. I don't like the little hinge on the one. It always bugs me. I like more of a straight up one and whatnot. Maybe a bit clunkier, chunkier numbers because people's eyesight is what it is. But
some of these are awfully busy, aren't they? Like, wow.
Yeah, I'm looking at the MLRS unit over here in the Divardi, and that is pretty busy. Now, to his credit, this particular designer fit everything on that counter that was on the original counter. Mm-hmm. So kudos for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Yeah, I mean, if that was what you were told to do, then what are you going to do, right? It's all going to go on there.
Yeah, I don't know how those really busy counters would look, shrunk down to, a half-inch counter size, but it is the terms of the assignment, so it's what are you going to do?
Right.
But half-inch counters are evil, so.
Well, yeah, but I'm assuming these are 5/8 and then for 5/8 or whatnot, Yeah,
or perhaps larger.
Yeah.
Michael Kirk chimes in here with a good comment about the argument for the woods hexes is that you can see the terrain sticking out around the edge of the counter, just like you could with the town. Michael, that's a valid point. I think what we were saying is not that they extend right to the edge and stay there. There's room for them to sort of overlap the edge slightly, even into the surrounding hexes, without overwhelming that terrain to the point where you're not sure which one it has one way or the other. So,
yeah, and it also depends on the size of the counter versus the hex.
Right.
That's another consideration.
Yeah. Yep. So, Gin Pickled Yak, Shane, we'll get to you in just a second with that question there. So we're going to finish going through some counters here real quick. This is, I'm scrolling the wrong direction. Come on, where'd my red counters go? There's my cards. There's my red counters. I'm going to zoom in on these guys. Again, a lot of standard iconography in terms of these are standard to what the U.S. military uses. And again, might make something a little bigger or a little busier than folks are used to, but that's just sort of the iconography that this creator was building for that specific audience. So I think we've kind of covered the bulk of these counters, thoughts on them. Unless either one of you have a specific call out here, I think we'll keep moving.
Yeah, I mean, I would say maybe so some of those red counters, you have the little symbol that's third in line with the factors. Yep. Now that's looks like a black symbol on that dark red. I mean, I probably would prefer like a white symbol, might pop a bit more on that dark red.
Okay.
But that's a little nitpick,
Yeah. Yep. Totally understand.
And then actually next to it, I see the little white too. And I probably would have put like a border around that to make that pop a little better against the light pink. Just to make it, especially because people might be playing this like in low light conditions.
Yep.
So.
Yeah. That's a bit hard to see. Yeah.
Yep. Totally understand. All right. Let's. Here are the cards that were created in this entry. And so very basic functional backs, nothing fancy, nothing wacky. Here's our front side of these things. Again, without necessarily knowing rules for any of these. That's what we're looking at. As the graphic design instructor grading for college, one of the things I'm checking is O's versus zeros. This looks like we've got a capital O here versus a zero over here. And I would want to go back to the original and check for consistency. But what else are we seeing here? Amabel, anything jumping out one way or the other?
I mean, they seem like good functional cards. I don't see anything real wacky going on with the spacing of the text. They seem to be, doing the job. And I would say compared to the original cards, one thing I noticed on those original cards from the original package or whatnot, is the text boxes were on a colored background that would vary in height depending on the text, and that's really distracting. This is very clean, very straightforward, and is much more appealing than that.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So before we move on to the next entry here, I'm going to stop this. We did have a question pop in from Shane that I want to throw up on the screen here. So when you send your graphics to a printer, do they have a template they like you to use, or do you know beforehand which dies the printer has on hand and designed to that? Amabel, you're using the same printer for all of your stuff, so I think that you're sort of going with Blue Panther's got these 6, 8, 10 different options, and you're working within those, right?
Yeah. So we have a handful of standard templates, again, like 5/8 inch, 3/4 inch, 9/16. Sometimes specialty templates. It's something that we figure out before we get the artist involved, so that we're giving them the information. If they're doing counters, which is usually ends up being me. Same thing with map size net. We have those standard templates. And we just kind of design around that and have that information on hand before we get an artist involved. Because the last thing you want to do is give them an assignment and then say, "Oh, we need this a different size."
Right. And if I don't have that information, it's one of those things I immediately ask for first thing. I have to know the sizes. That's like the very first thing when I'm designing anything. how do I start? I got to start from somewhere, and starting from scratch, I got to know what the sizes are for anything. If there are templates that are being used, please send them to me so I can begin with that as the background, and then I'll build on that.
Yep, totally understand. Just as a note for those of you watching, if you haven't already, hit like on the video, assuming you like it. You're still sitting around here watching, so I'm hoping you're enjoying what you're seeing. It just helps, bump up that YouTube algorithm for visibility here. All right, we're going to pull up our next entry here. Share screen. Let's go get that specific window. And so here was our other entry that came in. Again, we were hoping for a bunch. We ended up with 2. But we're running with the 2 that we've got. And Tim, this one numbered the hexes for you.
Well, in this case, it's not bad because this is a fairly open terrain. There's not a lot here, so putting those hex numbers in there isn't distracting like it can be. It's not that bad.
How do you feel about hex numbers in every hex versus like every 5 hexes?
Oh God, I hate that alternating stuff. It just distracts the hell out of me. Some people like it. I just don't personally. It looks weird.
Now,
Amabel,
I don't mind every 5 hexes. I prefer something like what was the game? There was a game GMD put out some years ago on the Winter War, like Finland and Russia, and they only numbered the hexes for like the cities and setup hexes, which are the only hexes that ever needed to be numbered. That I liked. If you can approach it like that, like which hexes are actually functional.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's
a reason. Yeah. Put it on.
Yeah.
Sure.
Now I understand numbering every hex if you're playing by mail or by email years ago, you want to say what hex you moved into. But today, if someone's playing not face to face, but through some kind of delay, they're likely to be used something like Vassal, where you don't need to write down all your moves. So I think in today's day and age, I don't know if you need to number every hex for any game. I certainly tend to request like no hex numbers. Well, everyone's different. I certainly prefer like not having hex numbers, and I certainly prefer if it does have hex numbers, then I want completely closed hexes. I don't want the little corners without lines.
Yep.
Because then it gets, I don't know, it's hard for me to focus on it when I'm trying to look at the numbers and there's just little corners everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, the little caltrops, I think, start to drive people a little crazy. Zooming in some here on some of the detail, we have odd shapes for our forest. We have rivers that don't hug the hex sides. These borders, I think, are a little starker than the previous one, which is fine. It's just a stylistic difference. But the swamp still hugs the edge of the hexes, but the forests clearly do not. And there may be moments where looking at the forest, you're even wondering if that actually is forest. Tim, what are your thoughts as you're looking at this?
Yeah, at the first, when I saw it, the forest, I almost thought they were swamps. And of course, then looking, this is the swamp over here, so this must be the forest. I do appreciate the fact that they're broken up. That's very nice. I like that. They're almost a little bit too subtle, though. I prefer to see them a little bit greener, just to give me a bit more definition as to what I'm looking at. This is, in terms of color palettes, it's similar to the last map. It's subtle. It's nice, but it could have used maybe just a little bit more in terms of more color differentiation, just to help me see what I'm seeing quickly. Having said that, you'll notice that on the edges, particularly around the edges of the sea areas, there's nice transitions there from the sea to the land. was very stark on the last map. This one, it's got it's more subtle. It's not suddenly from land to sea like a cliff sort of thing, right? That's very nice.
Yep. Amabel, thoughts on the map?
Pretty much what Tim said. I like it. I like the so the color that dominates the map. It has kind of a nice papery feel to it, rather than like just a very kind of stark like manila color. So I like that. It gives it some texture.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely some color variability in here as the shades move around.
Yeah, without getting too busy about it.
Yeah, and I especially noticed on the water hexes.
Yeah.
Although I suppose technically they should for water shouldn't it be the other way around? It would be lighter at the edges, and it should be more deeper blue in the middle.
Yeah.
On my next trip to Central Asia, I will take a look at the water and let you know.
I was a bit surprised that on both maps they decided to leave the color of the roads red, which was the same color as in the original test map. That, I tend to shy away from red on maps because it really is a bold color. It really stands out. I mean, if there's a reason for it, okay, but that's red.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So it was not a consideration that we asked our contestants to take in. However, I am curious with your guys' professional experience, Amabel, whether you've done it either in specifically giving assignments or evaluating what was sent to you, Tim, in executing assignments that you're given, whether or not color blindness is much of a factor that you address in your design. And I'm only saying that just because Tim making the note about the roads being red and red-green color blindness being sort of one of the most common. So, Amabel, is that something that you really factor in much in the design piece?
We do try to. We've certainly become more aware of it as time has gone on, and as we've become just more aware of how to make things more accessible to more people. We tend these days to run maps encounters through a color blindness simulator online. And that's really just to see. It depends, if the color is functional or not. If having a red or a green, and we probably wouldn't put red and green together anyway if we can avoid it. Having a red or a green piece, makes a difference, and there's not some other way to differentiate it, then we would use different colors in that case, or use different shapes, like the game Westphalia that we released. That was tricky because it's for 6 players only, and so we needed 6 player colors, and then we had some common bits, and the color one of the common bits was green, which that can be a problem with red, but it was a different shape and size of bit, so that differentiated it. So that will be something that we'll look at. I will agree with like the red roads. I'm not a huge fan of red for roads either. I prefer. I mean, really, my really strongest preference for roads is something that evokes a period. If it's a period piece, this one obviously isn't, or it just gives more of a road look than a red line look.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at maybe. There we go. Here's our counter sheet for this one. Now, this artist laid out everything as sort of a more standard counter sheet that you would be looking at. And so it's a little tough to see because of the dark text, but on the left side, you got the front, and on the right side, you got the back. So the white versus black stripe is really indicating front versus back here. But this is more of a traditional counter sheet layout. You've got the banks, the rows up here for the banks of counters with the strips in between for sort of structural integrity as much as anything. So let's zoom in a little bit on some of these and see what we've got here. Amabel, what are your thoughts as you're looking at these?
I mean, I like the differentiation with the black and the white stripes. I seem like they're nice functional counters. I like how big the factors are over on the right there, and then you have more room underneath for any kind of special symbols that are going on. The icons are a little small, but I don't know how important the unit icons are in the game. You know, if it's like a lot of war games where, you know, there's not much difference other than combat factors and movement factors between one unit and another, then, you know, having a smaller symbol isn't a huge deal breaker. I would say one thing I am looking at, and this is more from like a technical perspective, is I would probably have the stripe at top like bleed over to the edge of the counter, and I probably would do the bottom row flipped if I was doing this on a counter sheet. Just because, you know, there's going to be some slight variance in how the counter is cut depending on how accurate it is. And, you know, one row might be slightly cut differently tend to avoid that
Gap right in here.
Yeah. So I would probably extend it beyond that gap just to protect against miscutting. It's not really an information thing. All the information seems to be within the regular margins of a die or a laser, but I probably would do that just to protect against it.
I can see that.
You know, just for a visual appeal.
That makes sense. All right. Tim, any thoughts on the counters?
Well, I like how these ones are laid out. I like the fact that I actually like the fact that we've got the unit symbols and icons a little bit smaller. They're not taking up as much room. Again, it depends on how large these end up being printed out, whether that is an issue or not, whether you can still read them. I really like how we've got all of the numbers on the right-hand side, while we've got the symbols and iconography on the left-hand side. I think that that helps to break things up more easily, especially with I'm not sure what the icon is that was originally on the reds that was in the original row where you had two numbers and that one.
Yeah,
that just looked odd to me when I was. It just looked strange, and this way it seems to make more sense to have your icons on one side, your numbers on the other.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
it looks a lot cleaner.
Is this going to scare the hell out of any longtime war gamers with having the factors going vertically on the right instead of horizontally across the bottom of the counter? Are we gonna cause anyone's brain to melt?
Not these days, I don't think. No.
No.
All right. Whoops. Let's zoom this out, and then let's go. I think this is all for. Yep. Okay. So hold on. This particular one, I've got the cards in a separate file that I need to go pull up. So give me just a second. Let's do that. Nope, that's not the one I need. That's the one I need. The reason for it is the way the cards are laid out in this entry. It's one big
big file.
No, they laid it out one card. It's kind of the file is the size of the card. Nope, I need to remove that. Sorry, bear with me, folks. I'm trying to get the right screen shared because we have multiple files that we're cycling through as a part of showing this off. So this is where this particular artist put the entire card back. They made the file the size of the card. And so as we cycle through this, you're looking at that is one full card. So this is the back of the red cards. This is one of the fronts of one of the red cards. And so, Tim, as you look at this, what do you? I mean, going back to Amabel's point, we're not going to run into a cutting problem. We're pretty far from the edges here. We don't have to deal with a bleed. Tim, what are you seeing when you're looking at this?
It's always nice to have have room around the edges. That's nice. I like how on the top we have the two numbers that drop down into different boxes that are sort of connected. I'm not sure why they weren't just in that whole top area entirely, unless there's supposed to be room there for other text, other numbers. I'm not sure.
Well, I think some of the cards have some longer names on them, and so you're going to run into some spatial issues up there.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. Okay. Most of the time, this looks pretty good. That first one that we were looking at, there certainly was an awful lot of text there. I don't know whether I would have used such a bold font with so much text. It's a bit.
Yeah.
It's not all caps though.
There is that.
It's not shouting at you. No. It's not quite shouting.
And here are the blue ones. Amabel, as I'm just flipping through here, what are some of the things that you're seeing with the way these are put together?
I mean, I'd agree with what Tim is saying there. I probably would use a less bold font, but otherwise, they're very clean. They have a consistent look to it. And yeah, I see that. Can you scroll back a card, Brant?
Sure. Are we that
Maybe?
one?
Yeah. So like something like that, where I don't know what all the names of all the cards are in the game, but if that is the card with like the longest name, I probably would use a font where that's just on one line, rather than having that second line there, and then you could put the other stuff in the two numbers in the same block.
Yeah.
The first thing I do.
So here's where I think that's not necessarily the worst thing you've got is that this is a unit designation, because down here where it's saying card only works for indicated unit,
then you have the designation
on a separate line. I don't think that would be a problem. I think your point is valid that if that was just all simply text all the way across, then putting all the text on one line I think makes sense. But in this case of just having only the unit designation on a separate line, I don't think that breaks the visual too badly.
Yeah. Well, what I probably would do with something like that then is maybe have the unit designation in slightly smaller text as like a sub thing to really indicate it's a sub thing. The first thing I do when I'm laying out cards is I find the card with the longest name and the card with the longest effect text. And I make sure that I can fit the longest name on the card and the longest effect text so that I'm not, going through doing 40 out of 50 cards, then all of a sudden I need to fidget with something.
Yeah.
But
I have to remember to do that.
they're good functional cards, and I also don't have a whole lot of room to talk because I do the table battles cards, and people look at that. The graphic design is not necessarily the most appealing.
Yeah. They work.
Oh, they're functional. They work, but
yeah. No, totally makes sense. Tim, as you're working on card layout here, is this the kind of thing that you're normally getting in that you're trying to clean up and sort back out? How often are you getting hand scribbled index cards versus something, or worse, are you getting like the Excel spreadsheet that says here are the cards that I need?
Yes, I've had that many times. Yes, where you just have the Excel sheet and say this is what it needs to go on it. Please just put it on there. So that's usually what it ends up being. Probably because people, cards are just, I guess, harder to create for the amateurs.
Yeah.
And then I would be trying to figure out what goes where and what has to be highlighted and what doesn't. It ends up being a lot of back and forth, just like the map would.
Yeah.
So I would be sending back and forth about, okay, what do you like this? How about this? Is this color right? Is these fonts correct? This font is right.
Yeah, one of the things that I used to always do for a lot of graphic stuff, and so like I haven't done wargame artwork for anybody but myself. So that doesn't necessarily apply. But when I've done corporate logos or branding or those sorts of things, one of the things that I've done in every case is I'll take a baseline of something. Maybe it's a card like this, and I'll put 4 of them on a page or 6 of them on a page, and I'll do something different with all 6 so that people can take a look at it and go, I like this from number 1, I like this from number 4, and sort of do a bit of a Chinese dinner menu kind of effect to that. Where okay, tell me which ones you like, which ones you don't like. Let's pick one of these, and then we'll start adjusting from there. Or let's combine elements from 2 of these, see what they look like, and start adjusting from there. But I like to give people a menu of options to start narrowing it down some. One of the things that I found is that if you hand people a blank sheet of paper and say, draw me something, they don't have a clue what to do. If you hand people a blank sheet of paper and say, draw me a picture of a plant, now they've got some direction and they've got somewhere they can go. And so if I give them a piece of something to look at, knowing full well it's not going to be right the first time, okay, tell me what you want adjusted on each of these. And then people, because I'm telling them, tell me what you want me to change, they don't feel like they're offending me by asking me to change something. They know I want them to change something. But I'm giving them an array of options to start with. That seems to help. I don't know if that's been your experience at all, Tim. Amabel, obviously, like you're talking to the mirror when you're doing this, so
No, that's it exactly. Yeah, maybe not too. I usually have 2 or 3 different ideas that I like to bounce off from someone. Sometimes it's the designer, sometimes the publisher. Sometimes I just put it out there on Facebook and say, hey, what do you think of this? And then I'll put up, what do you think of this? What do you think of this one? People will say, well, that's great, that's bad, this is good. And then the publisher comes along and says, no, I like this one. And then you're done.
And then you back up to that one. Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, I'm going to kill the artwork because we've now gone through cards, counters, and maps for both of the entries, as well as what we had for the originals. And I think both of our entries had some very positive pieces to their to what they were able to put together. I really like the map textures that both were able to put in. I'm not as big a fan of sort of the splotchy looking forest hexes of the second one relative to the first one. That's the one thing that really sticks out to me on the maps. I like the more subtle texture in the background of the second one relative to the first. That was a point that you had made, Amabel, that it's that papery sort of feel. It's not one stark basic color across the entire thing. But outside of the background, I think I prefer the more obvious forest look to the trees that the first one brought than the second one. Amabel, is there any particular thing that really stuck out as a contrast between the two, one way or the other?
I think they're 2 different approaches to the same set of problems, which is what makes this interesting. At the same time, both are kind of restricted by the parameters of what it is. When we were talking earlier about hex grid maps versus area maps allowing for more creativity and more, expression. With a hex grid map, there's only hex grid map and like traditional kind of war game counters, form factors, only so much you can do within that because you don't want to reinvent the wheel necessarily. You don't want the counters to have Bauhaus font.
You had to. All right, world, that is a bit of an inside joke. Well, it's not that inside. There's a lot of people in the wargaming world that know, but Yeah, 3s and 5s look a lot alike in Bauhaus, and so maybe not the best choice for a war game typeface. So, anyhow,
and using standard symbols, that's a good choice. You don't want necessarily really unusual symbols a lot of the time.
Right.
So,
As you said, don't reinvent. Yeah, exactly. People know the stuff. Then what? Go with it. Sure, it works.
Yeah, I think there's a handful of the basic NATO symbols. I think are pretty well understood. Folks understand infantry, armor, artillery, cavalry, mech infantry, airborne units. I think when you start getting into amphibious wheeled units, that's where you got to start sort of playing with what exactly looks good and what's going to fit on the counter well and what's easily understandable at a glance for your players just sort of looking at the map across a vast array of information. And I think that's one of the things that not a lot of designers necessarily consider when they're first starting out. Don't just design each counter in a vacuum. Take 10 of those counters and throw them on a map together and see what sticks out and what doesn't, and what is your eye drawn to, and what do you have to really focus to identify. And that's that's one of those lessons you learn with some experience. So I do want to the two different entries that we had here. I'm going to totally butcher one of the names, and the other one is actually pretty easy. Edmund Hudson is a fairly easy name to not screw up. Edmund Hudson was the first set of artwork that we looked at. Not the originals that we were working from. That was from the game designer that created everything. But Edmund Hudson was our first one, and that was that set of entries. And that one, to my knowledge, Edmund's not been published anywhere, not anywhere that I could find. The second set, I'm going to script the last name, and so I'm going to have Amabel bail me out here. Ilya Kudryashov.
I think that's it. Kudryashov is how I haven't spoken to him, but So Ilya is an actual published designer and artist, and in fact has done work for Amabel over at Hollandspiele. Like 24 times.
Yeah, among other places though. I mean, Ilya's done stuff in a lot of different places, not just here. And so, Heth, you're bringing up an absolute point here, and that is for a week and a half of work, these chaps did awesome. Yeah, that is a really good job for a really tight deadline. And let's face it, there's been times where publishers have given artists that kind of deadline just out of necessity. But yeah, ideally, again, we would have liked to have given people at least a month worth of lead time to work with. We just had some challenges with getting the convention itself announced where we had some GMs that had some personal stuff they had to schedule around. This time of year, it's not just Father's Day weekend. You're also working around graduations and some family travel and whatever else. So assuming we try to do this again, we're definitely going to make it a point to give people some longer lead time. Tim, is there one thing in either of these entries that really jumped off the page at you as that was really awesome?
I think I already commented on the fact that I really like how the Iliad put the counters with the icons on one side and then the text and then the numbers on the other. I think that really worked well, especially when you look at the originals and how, I don't want to say they were a mess, but they were very busy.
Yes.
And it was just hard for your eye to pick out the parts that were important on those counters. You had to really look at them and go, what am I seeing?
Yeah.
Which are the numbers that are important? So that and the fact that he used smaller icons on the left side created the illusion, I suppose you'd say, of more room. Now, again, we don't know, since it's all in theory, how large those counters would be. Maybe if they were shrunk down too much, then we wouldn't be able to see any of those icons. I don't know. Yeah. But as they looked on the screen, I really liked how that worked out.
Okay.
Edmunds were fine. They were basically just a copy, sort of a copy of what was already there. It just wasn't. There wasn't that extra step that Ilya had given.
Yeah, a bit more of a reimagination almost.
Yeah, exactly.
Amabel, anything really jump out at you one way or the other as something that looked particularly great in one of the two entries?
I mean, just kind of the stuff we already touched on. I don't have anything particular to call out there as much.
Oh, that's fine. So this is what we've got now. Now, what we've done with only two entries, we weren't going to try and pick on one versus the other as you're a winner, which automatically makes you a loser. We're going to end up sending a prize to both of these guys, and so we're going to be a little magnanimous about it all and call it a giant tie. Just not picking on anybody, but with only two entries, there's only so much we can do. We were hoping for a few more, and honestly, I actually had a bunch of email from some folks. I even had one person who submitted some stuff, but one of the files wasn't formatted quite right. Emailed back, said, "Hey, fix this format, send it back in," and I never heard again. So it would have been nice to have had a couple of more entries to be able to play with. The timing is certainly a factor, and that's one of the things that Hethwell definitely pointed out, that for only a couple of weeks to work with, these folks did some decent work, and so that was
it really was. I mean, I would emphasize that I probably couldn't do all that in the amount of time. It's just that's pretty awesome. That's a lot of hours and hours of work put in there to be able to do that.
Yeah, not while having anything resembling a life. So cool. Well, listen, Amabel, what's the next thing coming out from Hollandspiele that we're going to see? Because I know District Commander Z&O just hit. What's the next one after that?
The next thing after that is a re-release of our last two holiday games, Reign of Witches and Toledo War. And we're putting that together as one pack with profits going to charity because people have been trying to sell them for $50 or $100 a piece, and they were free holiday games. So we're re-releasing them, and that's the next thing. And then after that, we're going to be re-releasing the entire Horse and Musket series. Mary's actually working on the layout of that as we speak, so that'll be sometime next month or two.
The Toledo War, that's the one where Ohio and Michigan fought over Toledo and Ohio lost, right?
Ohio lost. They got Toledo, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Just making sure I knew. And I don't know if you caught last night's happy hour with me and Gary floating around on YouTube there at all. We did it live from Gamers Armory, and so I was walking around with the laptop sort of showing off the racks as we were walking around. And obviously, but to anybody else out there, Gamers Armory actually has Hollandspiele games on the shelf, which is kind of cool. Like, you're normally, because it's print on demand, you're normally only ever selling direct, but Gamers Armory is one of those places that has Hollandspiele on the shelf, which is kind of neat. So
yeah,
that's wanted to make sure that you guys got the credit for being in at least store, maybe not in stores, but in store. So we wanted to call that out. Tim, what's the next thing that we're going to see in print from you?
I'm not sure. I'm actually still working on Shook's Troop, the Haya Safari game by Dennis Bishop. It has gone through vast amounts of development. And I've just today, I still have a few more changes I have to make that were called for in the map. Then hopefully that is done. Apparently they have finally gotten all of the development done, the play testing and the replay testing, and the replay testing has been finished. So hopefully that will see the light of day soon, and it certainly would be nice because poor Dennis, the designer, has passed on. So this will be probably the final thing you'll ever really see from him, and it's got a huge amount of work and amount of detail in it. So I think everyone will really like to see it, because he poured so much of his expertise into the design, particularly of the units. Every single thing that was ever in Africa, it seems like, is in here. So it'll be really nice to see Compass Games finally get that published.
Gotcha. No, that's great. All right. So Thank you very much to the both of you. You know, when I first reached out to you and said, hey, I'm doing this contest thing. Are y'all interested in being judges? I think you guys both thought I was nuts, which is fair. I kind of was.
I mean, that's what I think most of the time anyway. So.
Yeah, but I definitely appreciate y'all taking the time to go through the entries, to join us here on this call, and to be a part of all of this. That is fantastic. Really love it. We did have one last question pop in here. We're going to sneak this one in real fast. Not that one. This one. So one tip from each of you to anyone considering working as a part-time wargame graphics illustrator type person. Tim, you've been doing this for a while. What do you got?
Make sure you have a full-time job.
Have an actual income so you can do this on the side, huh?
Yeah, and really, I don't know whether I have any particular words of wisdom. I know we weren't going to get into the details, but in terms of graphic design, you're going to start talking about, well, what do you use? Do you use Illustrator? Do you use InDesign? Do you use Photoshop? And no matter what you use, you have to really try to be able to master that, right? I mean, it's taken me years and years and years in order to get where I am just using Photoshop. And I'm still only just scratching the surface of what it can do. I know a lot of people tell me, no, you should be using Illustrator. Well, I don't have time to learn years and years of Illustrator and Photoshop, so I'm just stuck with kind of Photoshop. But yeah. My advice would be learn one kind of system, probably Illustrator, but not necessarily. Look at all of the YouTube videos that you can, and just keep at it.
Yeah. Amabel, you've done a lot of the graphics work for Hollandspiele. What do you got?
One tip. Wow. Steal from yourself. Like learn new stuff, do new stuff. But if you have something that works, you can fall back on that. You know, yeah. When I do a new card layout, the card might be very different than other card layouts, but I have some basic stuff I already have ready. When I do new counters, I have a thing counters with all the standard NATO symbols I need. Now I might make them bigger, I might make them smaller, but I have that work done already, and that speeds up doing work going forward. The other thing I would say, this is 2 tips, I guess. The other thing I would say is to really think about the parameters of the project before you start working on it. It's a lot easier to plan out what size text you need, what symbols you're going to need in the counters and stuff like that ahead of time, rather than going through 40-odd counters and then realizing, oh, this one needs this special thing, and now it doesn't work with the visual look of it. Yep, absolutely. And I would say I really agree with Tim's advice as well. I'm in Photoshop. Everyone tells me to use Illustrator, but I'm still I can't figure out how to use it. It doesn't work for me. So I use Photoshop.
Yes, exactly.
Hey, actually, this past year, we upgraded to the new Photoshop, because before that, we had CS4.
That's what I use.
Oh, that's what you okay. Well, and
then we have another computer that uses the whole cloud one, whatever it's called, CC, Creative Cloud. The
Creative Cloud. I'm behind you guys, man. I'm back on like CS2.
Yes. It's too different, right? There's so much going on that's different. I just continually fall back on CS4 instead of using the latest
CS4
one.
for mine, it was running really poorly. So like eventually I was like, you know what, let's treat ourselves. It's a business expense. Let's do this. And I know someone that's train games who does all the maps on Corel, like Corel Draw, Corel Art.
That's what I know. Yeah.
Okay, that's good for you.
Yeah, I'm primarily working in Photoshop and InDesign. I do the individual graphic elements in Photoshop, but I assemble everything in InDesign, and I'm a big fan of layers. The one thing that I would tell everybody, and Ethel probably wouldn't expect me to chime in on this, but I've got a lot of years of being a graphics guy, going back to when I was in high school in the 80s. I ended up accidentally stumbling into publishing because I knew how to work the Mac, which was the computer that they had in the journalism lab in high school, and learned how to do all of the journalism stuff around the fact that I already knew how to use a Mac. And the one thing that I will tell everybody is, if you wait until you have fully mastered any piece of software before you start trying to do the work, you're never going to get started. Those things are way too deep and way too complex. Learn as much as you need to get started, and then figure the rest out as you go, because you're never going to get it all. My wife is a professional photographer that was a recent career change for her. And it took her a lot of years of trying to figure out what every single button and dial on her snazzy new cameras did before she was comfortable actually going out and shooting things professionally, and kind of had to, sort of give her a shove a little bit and say, look, you know enough to get started, figure the rest out as you go. And you're going to get better as you go, but don't wait to get started or you'll never get started. And I think that's something that a lot of people just need the encouragement that, yes, you know enough to get moving. You're not going to be perfect out the door. I mean, again, Tim, you've been doing this 15, 20, 18 years, whatever. You're still learning stuff every day, right?
Exactly.
Ditto here. Like I've been doing graphic layout and design work literally since the mid 80s, and I'm still learning stuff as I go. So,
yeah. And I would say, like, realize that it's not going to be perfect, and don't chase after perfection, because we've worked with artists who it will take them 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 5 weeks to do a project, and we've worked with artists where it's taking like 3 months. Well, if you're looking and getting into this as a way to make side money, you're not going to make a living at it, but you can make side money. You don't want to spend 3 months obsessing over a single map.
Yeah.
You want to be able to turn it around fairly quickly, very reliably, because that's what people are looking for. As long as you're taking pride in your work and doing good work, it might have been a little bit better if you'd done this thing, but you can drive yourself crazy spending 3 months doing that.
Yeah. And some of the details that people start obsessing over are ones that nobody ever notices anyway. 1 pixel difference when you're zoomed in at 600% on the screen isn't noticeable on a 5/8 inch counter. It's just not. The human eye ain't picking that out. Quit it, So yeah, that's get to the point where it's good enough, and it's not going to get to perfect. So, on that note, I hope this broadcast was good enough, because it wasn't anywhere near perfect. So, I thank you to the audience who joined us for this thing. Thank you especially to our 2 guests here, to Tim and Amabel, again, for giving up part of Saturday afternoon to come hang out with us and do this. I really appreciate you guys joining us for this. This was a lot of fun for me to just try something different for one of these virtual conventions. And who knows, we might try something a little crazy like this again next time. The good news is the guys at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, where this one came from, have a war game design program in the master's degree program there. So we've always got a half a dozen new designs every year to pick and choose from to run around with something like this, because they're all public domain. So we just got to figure out which one to use. But thanks to everybody involved, and we hope you're enjoying the ACDC, and you guys have a great time. We'll see you guys soon.
Okay. Thanks a lot.